The Holy Gospel is from Mark chapter 7. From there, Jesus set out and went away to the region of Tyre. He entered a house and did not want anyone to know he was there, yet he could not escape notice. But a woman whose little daughter had an unclean spirit immediately heard about him, and she came and bowed down at his feet. Now the woman was a Gentile of Syro-Phoenician origin. She begged him to cast the demon out of her daughter. Jesus said to her, "Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs." But she answered him, "Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs." Then he said to her, "For saying this, you may go. The demon has left your daughter." So she went home, found the child lying on the bed, and the demon gone. Then he returned from the region of Tyre and went by way of Sidon toward the Sea of Galilee, in the region of the Decapolis. They brought to him a deaf man who had an impediment in his speech, and they begged him to lay his hands on him. He took him aside in private, away from the crowd, and put his fingers into his ears, and he spat and touched his tongue. Then looking up to heaven, he sighed and said to him, "Ephphatha," that is, "be opened." And immediately his ears were opened, his tongue was released, and he spoke plainly. Then Jesus ordered them to tell no one, but the more he ordered them, the more zealously they proclaimed it. They were astounded beyond measure, saying, "He has done everything well. He even makes the deaf to hear and the mute to speak." The Gospel of our Lord.
Thanks be to God.
Well, good morning. It's good to be with you. As Pastor Rob said, I am Amy Kinsley. I'm the new-ish director for evangelical mission in the Synod. I feel like after 4 months, I'm getting a little sense of what this job is about, but your grace and patience is very much welcome. I bring greetings from Bishop Jeff Johnson and from my colleagues on the bishop's team. Thank you for your faithfulness to the gospel and the ways that you support all kinds of missions and work across the Synod and across the world. I'm from Sacramento, and coming down to Fresno is a little bit of a trip, so I made sure to meet with other ministries, including Alex Gonzalez and the people of Fuente de Gracia, and I know that you support their work as well, so thank you for that. And I'm glad to be here to share this proclamation of the good news as you are on this Sunday lifting up the work of faithful women in the church. I want to lay out a couple of things for us just to hold kind of lightly today. One is to say that though this is Women's Sunday, and it may be just one day out of 365 days, the intention is not to confine our appreciation of women and their faithfulness and contributions to only one day. We sometimes highlight the works of particular groups, but we don't want to just keep that to one day. The other is to be clear that lifting up women or others who have not always been centralized in the church or in our society, in doing so, we don't intend to turn the tables completely, meaning that now it's our turn to be on top, and those who were centralized are on the bottom or kept to the side. Because we know that's not a faithful interpretation of the gospel that values all of us equally. It tears down the dividing walls between us of gender, sexual orientation, ethnicity, nationality. Through Christ and our baptisms, everyone who shares human flesh is equally beloved and has access to the full blessings and saving promise of God. One day, we hope and pray that our society will fully reflect this vision of God's kingdom come on earth as in heaven. After all, Welka's purpose statement begins as a community of women made in the image of God, which is a truth revealed to us at the very start of the scriptures. In the first book of Torah, in the first book of our Christian Bibles, the creation of humanity is described like this: God made them in God's image, male and female. God created them. It is also true that even in our own Lutheran tradition, women have been valued to some extent, but also relegated to a particular place in the church. Only fairly recently, 54 years ago, were women allowed to follow the call to ordained ministry, as I have. And I'm grateful for all of those women who, for centuries, if not millennia before me, pushed at the boundaries again and again, persevering against those who told them that they were somehow not gifted enough for sharing the good news of Jesus Christ in and for the world. So in my sermon today, I want to consider the unstoppable women who can teach us all how to persevere in faith, even and especially when we face hardship and struggle, and who embody the transformative power of the gospel by demanding it for themselves, but also for others. We know that it was women who supported Jesus and Paul's ministry 2,000 years ago, even if they often had to work behind the scenes and within the boundaries of what was acceptable for them at the time. We have some early church writings about women like Tekla, who in the 2nd century heard Paul preach and was so moved that she vowed to follow him and become a disciple of Jesus, rather than fulfill the expected role laid out for a woman in her time, to get married and have children. She paid for her choice. A powerful man tried to force himself on her, to punish and shame her, and she resisted, which landed her in prison, and eventually she was martyred. But she never gave up her faith and her principles. I think also of women like Sojourner Truth, who stole back her own freedom from her enslaver and then fought for an end to the institution of slavery. As an abolitionist and a feminist, she spoke at a women's rights convention in Ohio in 1851, and she used the beliefs and customs of the time to demonstrate the absurdity that women were denied the same power and privilege as men. Sorry, my computer's picking up all kinds of things. So she used those beliefs to show the absurdity. And here she said, "I am women's rights. I have heard much about the sexes being equal. I can carry as much as any man. I can eat as much too if I can get it. I am as strong as any man that is now. As for intellect, all I can say is, if women have a pint and man a quart, why can't she have her little pint full? You need not be afraid to give us our rights, for fear we will take too much, for we cannot take more than our pint will hold." I think also of 2 Palestinian sisters I know from the city of Hebron, where I served for 3 months as a human rights worker. Despite cultural expectations in their society that women should stay home and raise families, Layla and Nawal ran a shop in the center of town. It was Nawal's entrepreneurial spirit and the great need of her and her neighbors to provide for their families that led her to form a women's cooperative. In her small village, the women all participate in making handicrafts to sell in the city. And though the sisters have received taunts from some who ask, "Do your husbands know what you're doing?" they remain unstoppable. These women I've named were creative and courageous. They led from underneath, pushing the boundaries in subversive ways, knowing when and how to press more firmly, and how to use the logic of the system to move the needle even just a little further toward justice for all. In today's gospel, the Syrophoenician woman is that kind of creative person. She has a desperate need and faith in Jesus, and she trusts that this is all she needs to free her daughter from the grip of evil. But in one of the more troubling interactions in all of the Bible, Jesus is not super kind to her. His metaphor of dogs at a master's table is a not-so-veiled insult. This woman, who is not Jewish, ran smack up against the model of ministry that Jesus was working with. Let the children be fed first, for it is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the dogs. Even though he is the one who crossed the boundary into her home territory, Jesus treats her as the outsider. Instead of offering God's grace in that moment, he withholds. But the woman refused to hear that as the final word. She turns Jesus' own assertion to her advantage. She is creative and determined. She's already crossed the line of how people of different genders were expected to interact. Perhaps she saw an opening in the very fact that Jesus was willing to speak to her at all. Sir, even the dogs under the table eat the children's crumbs. And in that instant, Jesus seems to see her, really see her, for the first time. It is a transformative moment. Like something is opened up for Jesus and his ministry in this one encounter. It's interesting to note the place of this episode because it is sandwiched between Jesus' own teaching to be careful what comes out of our mouths and his healing of a deaf person. Because Jesus' own words spill from his mouth and have the power to wound and dismiss. But after his encounter with the Syrophoenician woman, he meets the deaf man and commands his ears to be opened. The woman's faith in a God of mercy and grace unlocks a stuck place, even for Jesus, of all people. It is a unique occurrence in the narrative of the New Testament, but I think that's what makes it so powerful. The truth of God's grace comes through ordinary people who have been made in the image of God. And in this woman, Jesus sees it, and we see it. On his way to becoming the Christ that saves us, Jesus, the man born of a woman, allows himself to be opened to new ways of thinking about his own mission. He is unstopped by an unstoppable woman, one whose faith in the God who seeks and saves the lost saves even her own daughter. And her faithfulness opens up the expansive grace of God for the whole world, not just for the children of the house of Israel. Jesus is the one who saves. And we learn what that looks like from those he meets along the way, those who demand the blessings of God and don't give up. And if that isn't a reflection of the image of God, I don't know what is. Because we trust in this, that through Christ and at the cross, the perseverance of God's unstoppable grace is made real for us and for the whole world. Thanks be to God. Amen.